My name's Kaia Bloem, and this is everything that I have learned in my community in my class for comparative cultures on the deaf. First, ASL, or American Sign Language, was derived from French Sign Language, but has evolved into its own language. The Bowling family were very interested in deaf education because of the persistence of congenital deafness in the family. They received their education at the Braidwood Academy in Edinburgh, Scotland, the 18th century's most famous English language school for deaf children. Schools for the deaf might have turned out like Braidwood schools, but in the end developed differently because they weren't too willing to share their methods with a young upstart from America, Thomas Gallaudet. In 1814, Thomas Gallaudet met Alice Cogswell, a deaf child, and she inspired him to want to build a school for the deaf in America. He went to Europe to acquire the art of instructing deaf people. He ended up working for Laurent Clark, a French deaf man, to establish the first public school for the deaf in America and the American system of deaf education. Oralism is the education of deaf students through oral language by using lip reading speech and mimicking the mouth shapes and breathing patterns of speech. Alexander Graham Bell led the attempt to have deaf Americans use only oralism. He wanted to sterilize deaf people and prevent deaf people from marrying each other. Edward Gallaudet was the son of Thomas Gallaudet. He was the first president of Gallaudet University. He was against oralism and advocated teaching both ASL and written language for the deaf. This school became a university for the deaf in 1864. It was named Gallaudet University in honor of Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet. For many years, printing was the most common industrial occupation for deaf men, while dressmaking was the most common occupation for deaf women. Residential schools were at one time at the center of the deaf world. However, in the 1860s, oralists took over, and teachers of deaf children became mainly hearing adults, and deaf adults were less and less involved in the teaching of deaf children. The National Association for the Deaf was formed in 1880, a dangerous time for deaf people. The U.S. was changing into an industrial society, potentially leaving deaf people behind, and there was a determined assault being led on the traditional methods of teaching deaf children. Tactile aids involve a microphone connected to an amplifier that splits speech signal and creates a vibration of the body. These devices don't really help people who can hear very little speech or those who can hear a lot of speech. Over 1 million hearing aids are sold annually. However, few adult members of the deaf world use them. Mainly they are used by children whose schools and or parents require their use. They are essentially amplifiers, sometimes squealing and picking up unnecessary noises. More than 100 electronic aids have been developed to help deaf people use speech, but none have successfully come into wide use. A deaf person uses this board to communicate their wants, needs, and emotional state. Deaf people are routinely deprived of the right to medical care and other social services due to the absence of professionals who can speak their language. ASL interpreters are therefore greatly needed. Most deaf people do not have access to qualified interpreters. Many professionals in the hearing world would treat deafness like a disease that needs to be cured. This has led to some vile behaviors, such as pouring strange substances into ears or putting catheters up the nose and blowing into people's skulls. This is a visual representation of genealogy of a deaf family. Deaf parents commonly welcome the birth of a deaf child. Deaf families with many deaf members are usually proud of their genealogy. Coda means child of deaf adults. According to the Coda brothers and their YouTube channel, Codas have the best of both worlds. They can be hearing and pretend to be deaf. In 1988, the students protested Gallaudet University having another yet hearing president. The week-long protest called Deaf President Now led to the first ever deaf president of the school. It also changed how Americans viewed deaf people. Although they are not members of the deaf world, hearing people are often in charge of the affairs of deaf people, where they will attend school, where they will work, and what information they will receive, and so on. This is not right. Deaf people should be the ones to deprive their own lives. Thank you. Also, my cat was annoying. She was the one banging on the door.